following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. Hello, listeners around the world on radio, streaming, and podcast services. This is It's Not Therapy. I'm Liana and I am not a therapist, but I am your source for navigating the madness of mental health using my top 10 sayings for going good crazy. Now, this week, if you hear me lisping a little, it's because I got Invisaligns, the plastic braces on my lower teeth, and I'm still adjusting. That's why there was no episode new last week. I was in a lot of pain and I sounded worse than I do now, but we're gonna keep going because the last week I was live, I said we were gonna talk about people pleasing, and I'm honoring that. People pleasing, oh dear, people pleasing. People pleasing isn't just being nice to people for the sake of being nice. The people pleaser doesn't want to please others. The people pleaser feels the need to please others for reasons. And they're often good reasons. But when we're constantly in a state of I need to regarding other people, we're rarely getting our own needs met. The people pleasing is about preventing or getting some sort of outcome. And it's not healthy because top 10 phrase, healthy goals are based on things you can't control, and you can't control other people. You can't. And because of that, because you're trying to do the impossible, you're in a state of constantly transactional relationships while the people pleaser never feels in control. You don't feel like you're getting anything meaningful out of the exchanges. You're just giving. And the only thing you're getting out of it is, that's where the reasons come in, right? The good reasons I talked about include fear of rejection, really deep-rooted insecurities, the need to be well-liked, and, in this who you know, not what you know economy, that's valid, right? Fear of abandonment, fear of being unloved, fear of disappointing others, fear of punishment, fear of negative consequences. That's the problem with people pleasing. It's living in constant fear and anxiety, and simply being nice inspires good feelings, not just constantly trying to fight off negative ones. This is why I don't like the name people pleasing. It's just a fact. You have to do a certain amount of maintenance on relationships, which means to a point, the people you want to stick around need to be pleased with you. Now, there's a difference between wanting people to be pleased with you and needing people to be pleased so that you can fend off some catastrophe or, to guilt or coerce them into being nice to you back or not leaving or whatever. It's that coercion. It's the trickery. That's the problem. People pleasers, create those environments of coercion. They spread it around while they're feeling like they need to, like they're being coerced, right? If someone around you just messes up and learns from it, that's a solvable problem, right? But if people feel coerced into certain behaviors, and I've noticed that a lot of people pleasers inadvertently send out messages that people need to tiptoe around them or else because they're chronically anxious and on the verge of explosion. That damages relationships, obviously, right? This need or compulsion, this coercive dynamic where everyone is doing allegedly nice things out of a perceived need instead of because they want to. That's the core of the problem. And to become less of a so-called people pleaser, the first step is the very painful process of being truly honest with yourself about what you're doing. And I say this as a reformed people pleaser. At its core, people-pleasing behavior is manipulative. Now, for the purposes of this show, we're going to stay in the realm of just vanilla people-pleasing. Right? We're not going to get into any of the personality disorders where this is a potential dynamic, most notably borderline personality disorder and dependent personality disorder. Dependent personality disorder is a lesser known one. It's sometimes described as people pleasing on steroids. Now, if you're a people pleaser, don't self-diagnose with dependent personality disorder. I grow more anti-self-diagnosis by the day. If you think you have a serious condition, go to therapy, get a diagnosis. Many of these conditions can look very much alike. And I am saying this as someone with a PTSD diagnosis that people call narcissist all the time online, right? Now, is there a stigma attached to having a diagnosis? Yeah, people like to call me crazy at the drop of a hat. This is why I distinguish between good crazy and bad crazy and say you're crazy is only a problem if it's hurting you, right? At the end of the day, the diagnosis was more helpful to me than the nasty stuff people say hurts. If people are going to come at me that way, they're outing themselves. That actually helped me in its own way too, right? You're crazy is only a problem if it's hurting you. And people pleasing hurts you. It also hurts the people you're trying to please if, they're not just straight up abusing you. People pleasing gets into a cycle of codependency, of an expectation of mind reading. And at the end of it, it's an indication that your self-worth, or the self-worth of the people pleaser in your life, is dependent on other people to an unhealthy degree. Underlining unhealthy degree, right? We all need to lean on people some of the time. We should not be terrified these people are going to explode on us or abandon us. The leaning on them should feel comforting, not like a dependence, hence dependent personality disorder. Similarly, we all benefit from hearing praise that we actually believe is true sometimes, right? All of us do. All of us. I don't care who you are. And if you grew up with neglect, that lack of meaningful approval from those early life caregivers, parents, possibly teachers, there's a lot of school trauma out there that isn't getting talked about enough. Either way, in early life, if you can't recall hearing people say what you're good at, what is good about you, without it being conditional somehow, without there being some sort of catch or expectation. If you felt like the love and safety that the adults around you gave you was conditional on you making them happy all the time, that's the perfect conditions for people-pleasing behavior as an adult rooted in trauma or neglect. And it makes sense, right? When we're kids, our entire identity is based on the opinions of the people around us. Our independent selves, our view of ourselves as individuals is not something we're born with. We're babies. We're dependent, right? Through those teenage years, right? 12, 15, pushing it up to 18. Those years that people love to complain about teenagers suddenly becoming so difficult and defiant. Guess what? Those teenagers are figuring out who they are. So, of course they're going to be less obedient than a kid whose entire life is about being told whether or not they're a good kid. And that's all they understand. Unless that kid is a budding sociopath, if they've told they're good, if the parents are loving and not abusive and not that conditional kind of love that comes and goes, then the kid grows up with a sense that at least something about them is good, right? The problem is we tend to talk to kids like, be a good boy, be a good girl, not do good things because you're a good person, so show it, right? And it's really important to teach kids the difference between doing a bad thing and being a bad person. And if all that gets mixed up in childhood, there's a core belief that forms that the minute someone gets upset with you, some catastrophe is going to happen. There's going to be some huge fight. Someone's going to walk out of your life forever. They're going to turn abusive. They're going to call you a bunch of names. And the thing is, in life, sometimes that happens. And those of us who've developed, a modicum of healthy self-esteem can be upset, hurt, angry, confused, even a little scared that someone just turned, like extremely, okay, a lot scared maybe, depending on how much they blew up. But that's not the same as feeling like it was my fault or feeling like I have no value because somebody doesn't like me. And that's really the core of the behavior we call people pleasing. That, it's your responsibility for other people's moods. You have to, or you're nothing. And that's why people pleasing gets into that cycle that I talked about last episode on ghosting. People do nice things expecting, not hoping, but expecting, needing, in fact, to get something out of it. Whether it's just peace or a lack of conflict or, usually in romantic relationships or friendships, they expect the other person to do nice things back as, an external source of worth. The problem is, what's considered a nice thing? Well, that's highly subjective, right? If buying someone clothes, for example, one person might think that's a really nice thing. It's considerate. I hate shopping. No, really, I hate shopping. Someone else might think, though, are you trying to tell me how to dress? I can do that myself. Thanks. Don't buy clothes for me. So in that latter case, instead of, working it out in advance, being, hey, do you actually like this? The people pleasing has this sort of, anticipation, this mind reading, this guessing and being wrong too often in a big way. And that can be very, very tiring on everyone involved. Not just the people pleaser, but also the people around the pleaser. The people around the people pleaser get the message loud and clear that if you tell the people pleaser that they did something wrong, or, you give the sense that you don't like what they're doing, well, then there's going to be some sort of explosion there. In this case, running themselves down or self-pity or withdrawing or disappearing, In some cases, the people pleasers themselves turn nasty and tell you everything they think is horrible about you and what you're doing wrong. Because, if they can't separate did a bad thing versus am a bad person in themselves, or there's some immediate meltdown of I'm a terrible person, I can't do anything right, well, that's normal for them. There's a very good chance they're assuming everybody has some commentary like that in their head. And that's not true. The other thing I hear is, people think everyone else has their stuff completely together and they don't. And it's not true, but say it is. Everybody else is walking on eggshells in that, scenario around the hot mess people pleaser who is always clearly nervous and right at the end of their rope. Everyone can see it. Do you notice that nobody feels like they have a full range of choices in this relationship? Everybody's behavior is restricted. Everything is some sort of, based on need. That's the issue, right? That's why the whole people-pleasing thing, I think the name's all wrong. I call it manipulation via acts of service because nobody's pleased in the long run when people please. So many peoples. Okay. People get upset when I use the term manipulation, and so I think that requires some time to unpack, okay? We'll take a break. When I come back, manipulation is something everyone does. I consider it more of a neutral thing than an inherently evil thing, but it's very important to recognize that you're manipulating when you're manipulating so you can keep it in check. So, do you have a story you think would be good for the show? Are you interested in sponsoring the show? Liana at nottherapyshow.com. See, this is something of hey, sponsors, give me money. Yeah, like it. Well, I'm being open about it. It's not a manipulation. Liana at nottherapyshow.com is my email. Nottherapyshow.com is the website. At nottherapy on socials. People pleasing. Why I hate the name, because it's actually manipulation via acts of service. When we come back on It's Not Therapy. following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back and it's the therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. We're still talking about people pleasing. And that's the commonly known name. It's not going away. I know that, but it's wrong. I say so because no one's really pleased when someone is a chronic, air quotes, people pleaser. Again, people pleasing is not just doing nice things. People pleasing is about manipulating other people through those acts of service to get an outcome you want or to avoid some outcome you don't want. And the minute I say manipulation, oh, it's a thing. The thing is, I say this because I had to recognize I was doing it, even though I felt completely powerless. That feeling completely powerless was why I was doing it. You know, it was a big symptom of my trauma with a big side of how I was raised. Right? Just an example. I was raised in one of those families where it was a stereotypical, mom would do a lot of very considerate things for people. But instead of communicating her own needs and asking for help when needed, say, hey, can someone help me with the dishes? She would expect people to just know she wanted help with the dishes. And when she didn't get it, she'd go in the kitchen and then you hear the smashing around, muttering to herself, right, you know the scenario. That expectation that we would just know that she wanted help, that was what I was raised to think was normal. And that sense that anticipating needs was normal and something everybody did unless they were just a selfish jerk. You know, that was difficult to unlearn as opposed to a family environment where it's like, hey, there are a ton of dishes out here. I need help. You did the eating. Help me clean up, right? Very, very different paradigm. It seems like a small thing, but it manifests in a lot of ways, right? We see this particular kind of people pleasing more in girls and boys. The problem is that one of the big ways boys people please this right now is through the use of their bodies. There's this real problem now with boys thinking that sex makes you have value, sex with another person. You know, girls liking them is the pinnacle of being a manly man. You know, more on that next week in our Men's Mental Health Month episode. The point here is that everyone has a particular flavor of people pleasing that they're vulnerable because, you know, that's what they were taught growing up. And breaking those habits is tough because by the time you realize it's a problem, at least in my case, the people around you are so used to you behaving that way that it becomes, you know, the crabs in the bucket phenomenon. Crab tries to crawl up, all the other crabs pull him down. You know, it's a scenario like this. The main person who's in therapy starts making changes to better themselves, to be less symptomatic. Rationally, that's better for everyone. But the family kind of freaks out. Even to the point they start maligning and undermining the therapist and going, oh, maybe you should see this person that my friends have been to. I'd never pick out a therapist for a family member. You know, you may mean well, but it's better to not have those family connections. Just let them have someone who is theirs, who has, you know, an outsider perspective. And I know it's scary to think that a person in your life is bad-mouthing you to your therapist. You know, I'm a peer counselor. People are critical of their partners in their sessions with me. And I'll let you know, I take that with a grain of salt. It doesn't mean they're wrong. Doesn't mean they're lying. There's just other frames, right? A therapist with a license should, emphasis on should, be able to recognize the same thing. Now, some things are just flat out abusive. And some things are just manipulative, which is where I came to my awareness that people pleasing is actually just manipulation via acts of service. I didn't like it when my mother was smashing cutlery around in the kitchen instead of just asking someone to help her with the dishes. I didn't like it, but I thought that's what proper women were supposed to do. So I replicated the behavior until I realized, What am I doing? I have choices here. And yes, asking for things is vulnerable because if you ask and you get rejected, yeah, that hurts. You feel ignored. You feel unappreciated. But I realized not asking, you think you're avoiding rejection, but the emotional impact is actually based on the assumption that you would get rejected. So I just felt rejected already. And once you realize these things, it makes it a lot easier to change your behavior. In the case of people pleasing, there is a big difference between just doing something nice just to be nice. Sometimes doing something nice for other people really helps your own old mood, right? Like, yeah, you say that's selfish all you want. It's a good kind of selfish. There's a big difference between that and doing something nice and then expecting other people to just know now they're supposed to go above and beyond for you because that's the way it works because of some unwritten rule. Not only is that putting a value judgment on how other people treat you, it's expecting other people to mind read. You're expecting other people to know without you clearly saying what's going to make you happy. And they might not be as observant as you regarding, how they take their coffee or what sandwich they like. That doesn't mean they don't care. It just means clearer communication is going to benefit everyone there. And mind reading can backfire. One of the things I hear a lot from people in relationships is when mind reading's expected, they thought they were doing nice things, but none of them seemed to land properly. Everything seemed to be wrong and just made their partner actively upset, so they just stopped doing anything. It makes sense, doesn't it? What would actually solve this problem is actual communication. No more mind reading, talking, thinking with using sounds, right? Externally, right? So, hey, people pleasers, hate to break it to you. From a reformed people pleaser, that nice thing you might be doing for someone, it might actually be freaking them out and driving them crazy because they notice how nervous you are all the time. So your nice gestures, they have an edge. They see the expectations. And they have no idea what they are or how to meet them. That is why it's manipulative. And this is a very, very hard mind shift to shift for a lot of people. Mindset to shift. There we go. A lot of people think that this mind reading is just the way of the world. And ideally, everybody does nice things for the people in their lives, but that's why this whole love languages thing, as cheesy as the terminology is, it can really help with this stuff, right? Just as an example, say somebody loves gifts because it's a tangible thing. When they're feeling down, they can take it out and look at it and think someone does care about me because they gave me this thing, right? That is what I've heard from people who are gifters as a love language, right? They like gifts. It's not greed. It's something tangible that they can go, somebody gave me this, someone cares. But compare that to somebody who's desperately trying to get rid of stuff. They have too much stuff in their lives. They're trying to get rid of stuff. They're not going to find gifts the same boost, right? Because gifts are just more stuff. And that's true of any kindness. It really only works if a person wants to be a part of it. The minute they're doing it on pain of God knows what will happen if they don't, that's damaging the relationship, not strengthening it. And that's the way people react to people pleasers. There's some work that everyone needs to do in every relationship so that other people feel comfortable. But that's something you should go into wanting to, not feel like you need to, or else. If you're like, oh, I have to do this or else, that's a sign of some work to do in the relationship, okay? Now, the idea of need is more complex than we give it credit for. And I don't have time this episode to get into it. It's something for another time, because no specific other individual is required to give you the things you emotionally need. That's why I focus on boundaries, not needs as much. Other people don't have to like your boundaries, but they do have to respect them. Top 10 phrase. If you set good boundaries for yourself, you're going to find that your needs are much better met, because you're not giving away so much all of the time. When you're doing something just to keep the peace, it doesn't feel good, does it? So when you're doing those so-called nice things, expecting some sort of reciprocation, expect that the people in your life are going to feel coerced. Like the smashing the dishes around, right? Do you want that? And some people say, yeah, I do. Well, that's okay. You're self-aware, right? If you're setting up the scenario you want, great, no problem. We're done. Awesome. But if the answer is no, you don't want people to feel coerced around you, including coerced to stay around you. How do you change? How do you change people pleasing? This is the part where articles online get very, very vague. So we're going to start talking about these changes based on the idea, again, that people pleasing is actually a form of manipulation. Don't freak out. Maybe you think you have to manipulate. That's okay. We'll talk about that. But it is manipulation. Question, comments, concerns, Liana at nottherapyshow.com. Nottherapyshow.com is the website. Not Therapy Show is socials. When we come back, more on why people pleasing is actually a form of manipulation, and how you can start making changes based on that on It's Not Therapy. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back in It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. We're still talking about people pleasing, and my theory, my realization, stepping away from people pleasing myself, is that it's a form of manipulation. It isn't just being nice. It's being nice because you're terrified not to be, and there's some outcome you want. Now, people get very, very upset, I keep saying this, at the idea that it's manipulation, because manipulation is a charged word. And if you were listening to the previous segments on this, I said that I see manipulation as a neutral thing. It's a tool, ideally, that you minimize the use of and restrict it to uses for good instead of evil. Helping the people who just need a little push to do the thing they really want to do. Yeah, no problem. But people pleasing never pleases anyone in the long run, including yourself. So it's not a manipulation used for good, right? It's not, say, a motivational phrase helping someone make better choices, right? It's, I'm going to do this thing so they can never, ever leave me. That's plotting to keep someone a prisoner to your issues, just like you already are. It isn't good for you. So it isn't good for them either. That I'm going to make them not leave me. Think about what you're saying. The little manipulations, like the crashing around the dishes thing I talked about before, instead of asking for help. Those little manipulations are the easiest to change because they're just behavior modifications, right? They're habits I picked up. Being socialized, female, feminine, whatever you want to call it. This idea of always being nice and kind and never asking for anything and always being helpful, that is part and parcel of coming from one of those families that after dinner, women just instinctively know, get up and help or else. It's the or else part that is the red flag. Everyone's so focused right now on what bathrooms trans women pee in. Happy Pride. But gendered socialization historically is a very real thing, and the bathroom thing is just a small part of it. And it comes out in ways like women are more often taught that help in the kitchen is an expected thing, not nice thing for you to do than men are. We can't just ignore some of these things because it's part of what leaves women feeling profoundly lonely in monogamous, long-term, heterosexual relationships. You've heard that right. We talk a lot about the loneliness epidemic in men lately, but women in long-term monogamous relationships, these women are lonely. The data on women, in this way, we don't see it in men, and it's quite a stark contrast. And part of that comes from this culturally trained people-pleasing behavior that's specific to women. And similar to the people-pleasing behavior that men do around sex, no, really, topic for another time. This is the stuff you can't just do a behavioral correction. You're gonna feel lost in the short term. People are gonna think something's wrong with you in the short term. It's a hard change that temporarily breaks your life. Thing is, that life wasn't working for you. I advise clients that if we're going to do this, if we're going to make these big changes, say in advance, look, this is a behavior that you realized wasn't healthy. If you don't have the energy, if you don't have the resilience at the end of the day, you don't have the distress tolerance that you really need. And, you think it's better for everybody if you had fewer blowups or meltdowns and got overwhelmed and withdrew less, right? So you're going to be making some changes. And if you have specifics to those changes, outline them. Let people know in advance. That's way better than just changing, Because when all of a sudden you stop the people-pleasing, people might think they've done something wrong, right? And that's, oh God, what did I do? Again, remember, people-pleasing creates a cycle of feeling coerced and like there's some impending doom in everyone involved whenever there's the slightest change. Right? And that origination of feeling like you have to do these nice things to appease some sort of sleeping dragon, I don't know about you, those assumptions were formed in childhood for me. So you got to go way back. I mean, granted, okay, my father was a human powder keg who flat out told me that people didn't like me, right? And this is part of the reason I once dropped a publicist, because their advice to me on something, a strategic point was make them like you, you cow. And I immediately was like, yeah, if that publicist was saying that to my face, what would she say behind my back? The truth is, I had to unlearn this from childhood. You can't just make people like you. And I think that was really part of the reason my father was a human powder keg. Right? Like, he was a bully. He really was. But my theory, and he's dead now, so I can't prove it. I can't ask him. But, he'd start feeling insecure. And he had no distress tolerance because he had that can't separate, do a bad thing versus I'm a bad person. So he blew up to control everyone around him, so there'd be no consequences for the perceived bad thing / bad person, right? Thing is, because of this, because there was always a threat of him blowing up, nobody terribly liked being around him. But yes, people did do a lot of things to just keep him happy so he didn't explode. And again, when that's your parent, you just assume that's normal. That's just how men are. Now, obviously, I've come a long way now based on what you've heard me say, right? Like, I don't believe that about men anymore, because no, people can be angry. People can even not like you without blowing up, without plotting against you. And, okay, real talk. The idea that some people are not going to like you no matter what you do sometimes is a scary thing to confront as somebody who had to confront it. Then it happens a few times. Somebody is just not going to like you no matter what you do. With some people, you realize nothing you do is ever enough. And when it isn't enough, because these people haven't learned to meet their own emotional needs, it's your fault. These people have spent their whole lives coercing people like my father did, instead of learning how to earn it, learning how to live with it. Sometimes, in a very unfair emotional landscape, you can totally earn it and not get something from people. That's what makes the people who do like you so precious, right? But ending people pleasing means facing that fear of, we call it cancellation now. And It's a hard thing because, yeah, some people, they'll blow up on you. They'll spread rumors about you. They'll lie about you. And it happens to every single person who works in anything connected to mental health. Trust me. It's worse for people like me who work in the media. You know, it's uncomfortable for me to come out here and tell y'all I used to people please, right? And I even acknowledged it was manipulation. Oh God, I admitted a bad thing. And some people will go and they'll use that. And that is my cat making herself heard. Because people pleasing is a bad thing. Not just for yourself, but for other people too. Being afraid doesn't give you the excuse to do anything you want. And, you know, if you realize that you've been using being afraid as an excuse, you have to take a good hard look in the mirror or your camera phone. You know, ask yourself, what are you really afraid of? Are you afraid that person's going to freak out and become abusive? That was it for me, right? And then the next question I had to learn to ask myself is that the person right in front of you? Or is this, like in my case, you know, my biological father who died years ago? It's very important to separate past from present because people pleasing is often a habit with deep roots, right? I had to learn to give people chances to show they're not like my father. I mean, if they blow up on me in the first chance, like, all right, you know, in this way they are like my father, so we're not doing that again. They deserve that one chance just out of fairness. That's about what it says about me. That's me doing the work. Giving them another is my choice. It's not mandatory. Now, people who blow up are scary, right? Even if it's blowing up in fear. The thing to keep in mind is people don't have the right to do anything they want to just because they're angry or scared or they have anxiety or they have trauma, right? Keep telling yourself that. Keep repeating that. You'll start to believe it with enough repetition. Repetition retrains the brain. Now, this is, like I said, a tough process. Sometimes, you know, you might already be feeling pretty beaten down by life. You may feel beaten down in the process of changing this very major part of how you navigate the world. It's okay to be afraid. Feelings are feedback. It's okay to have any feeling you want, right? It doesn't give you the right to do anything you want. If that fear is causing you to scurry around anticipating needs, you know, that you're not even sure it needs, you know, it's just doing a bunch of things the person didn't ask you to do. Well, it's time to take stock if you realize they're doing that, right? If they really are that kind of bully, no matter how much scurrying around you do, it's not going to appease them, okay? It doesn't matter if you do 200 things right, 1,000 things right. They're going to find the one thing they think you did wrong, and they're going to seize on that. That's going to define you. Because they're looking for it. They're a bully. Bullies bully. You can't appease them. Not for long. And if they're not a bully, well, you scurrying around doing a whole bunch of things that they didn't ask for, basically kissing their butt, they're going to think something is off, right? Why are you doing that? Stable people don't want people doing things like that for them. It's uncomfortable. At least it is for me. I will actually say, why are you doing that? And a lot of the times people don't know. And, you know, this is why I check in with the why. Why are you doing this stuff? Why are you doing this considerate thing? Is it just to be nice? Is it really just, if you got nothing in return for this, would you still think this is a nice thing to do? Because that is a great way to live your life, right? Or are you doing it to get something or to prevent something from happening? And people are, well, that's just normal, right? That's just your network, right? I'm going to let you in on something. if you're trying to tightly control your environments like this, I guarantee you, people don't see you as nice. They see you as controlling. Even if you feel completely out of control, and most people who behave this way do, they're offended to be called controlling because they don't feel it. But think less about the feeling coming in and more about your behavior coming out. If you are doing things to get something or prevent something, you are trying to control outcomes. And it's not possible. It will never be enough. Okay? This is a really tough thing to face because it means just finally stopping and letting that feeling of a lack of control catch you. It's awful. I've been there, right? You have your reasons for doing what you're doing. I've said this whole show. And yes, the fear is real. That trauma is real. That anxiety is real. That's why I start off saying that the first step to ending people pleasing rooted in trauma is you gotta face the trauma. But how can you have nice things, right? How can you get that feeling that you're valued to people, for people to stay in your life and not leave and all that stuff? Okay, that'll be our final segment. It's simpler than you think. Questions, comments, any feedback whatsoever, Liana at nottherapyshow.com. Nottherapyshow.com is the website. At Not Therapy Show is social media. Now, how to get nice things without people pleasing on It's Not Therapy. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back in It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. We're still talking about people pleasing. Why I believe it's manipulation by acts of service and how I stopped. And in the final moments of the show, I want to talk about the fact that, yeah, everybody would like people to do nice things for them. The thing about a nice thing is nobody has to. The minute they have to, or else, it's no longer a nice thing. And realize that if that's how people perceive you, they're going to think you're kind of a bully. Yep, no way around that. So what do you do instead? Well, you ask any athlete, or the musical Hamilton, I am not giving away my shot. I am not giving away my shot, right? Like, you have to make the opportunities, knowing the puck isn't always going to go in the net. You're not always going to hit a home run. You're not going to make every free throw. That was a lot of sports metaphors. Hopefully one landed. If you're a video game player, right, you're not going to go through every game without getting a fail state. Failure is a part of it. Failure makes the successes feel good, right? It's not just a part of life. It really does make when it works feel better. And so you have to accept that, yeah, you may hope someone does a nice thing for you. You may hope someone likes you, but there are no guarantees, and sometimes it's just not going to happen, and it's not about you. If you think there's behaviors you need to change, great. If, you don't, well, it was a mismatch, right? But the opposite of people pleasing is, carefully observing and decoding your own behavior and going, what does this say? What makes me feel valued? What makes me feel cherished? What are my values? Who am I as a person? What makes me feel like I matter? And then, hey, actually say to people, this is what makes me feel like I matter. Like, for me, as an example, I think maybe because of what I do, I understand. Unless there is some detail, no, I'm not going to believe you understand. Somebody trying to perspective take and put themselves in my place, right? Somebody having the hard conversation, actually talking it out And admitting feelings without trying to control, that means the world to me. That is someone I am going to be fast friends with, right? I like things to be organized, right? Now, I know not all the time, but people who do the last minute chaos thing, that's not my idea of a good time. So anything that somebody does to tame the chaos, to have it not be last minute so that I can plan and, schedule's a big thing. That makes me feel valued. There are other things, but these are just examples, right? And that may mean nothing to somebody who likes to be spontaneous. And that's the whole point, okay? Everybody's different. That's what makes us individuals. That's the whole point. That's why anticipating needs doesn't work. Everybody's needs are different. And, if you don't know what your values are, you can't know what your needs are. And if you don't know what your needs are, you don't know how to meet them. And nobody's going to make you happy but you. Happiness is a choice. And it's also a series of choices. Keeping not great people in your life is a choice. Risking being alone so that you can meet better people is also a choice. And ultimately, the reason I came up with the idea of happy math is this a momentary thing, a tick, a symptom of trauma? Or is this something that is either relatively harmless and is going to make me happy right now? Okay, no problem. I went and saw The Ballerina on the weekend. It was a lot of fun. It's a John Wick movie, okay? If you like John Wick, you'll like this movie. I did that just happy, right? It was just not earth-shattering, not life-changing, but a good moment. Other things are more long-term. And to really meet your own needs, you have to know what those needs are. And sometimes I just need to see a movie where people have a flamethrower duel. That is a very strange and interesting place to stop, but I must watch the clock. Questions, comments, concerns, Liana at nottherapyshow.com. Nottherapyshow.com is the website with the contact form, or at nottherapy on social media if you need some individual attention unpacking your potential people-pleasing tendencies. Remember, your crazy is only a problem if it's hurting you, no matter what anybody says. See you next time.